Wednesdays Reread. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are two best friends who usually do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today we're three
best friends.
Because we are welcoming to the podcast Jordan Ifueko, the author of the Raybearer duology and the recent book in the Raybearer universe, The Maid and the Crocodile. Welcome to the pod, Jordan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This is really fun already. So
we're so excited that you're here. We loved your books so much.
I know that we said this off mic, but we binged them. I listened to all the audiobooks over the past 2 weeks. Your audiobook narrator is amazing.
And we got a new one for The Maid and the Crocodile, who
Yes.
I'm obsessed with. It was her first audiobook ever. And the reason for that is that she's an actress she's like done like Marvel, she's in The Color Purple, and I met her in Atlanta, and I kind of low-key begged her to do it, and she did, and like blew it out of the park.
She blew it out of the park. Like the accent work was amazing. Like these books are so good. So, well, can you tell us a little bit about what brought you back to Aritsar, like 10 years after the event of Raybearer and the Redemptor? Because we are here to talk about The Maid and the Crocodile primarily.
Well, sure, yeah. So when I wrote Raybearer, first of all, I started that whole world when I was literally like 13. Like it was really old by the time it was published when I was around 25. But at that time, what was really important to me were stories in which Black girls were treated with veneration and dignity, which is still very important to me. But it made sense then that when I approached this magical world, it would be from the perspective of someone who's like at the upper echelons of power. Like, you know, kids like make dolls and effigies of her, right? Because I didn't want any of the conflict of this book to come from a Black girl's degradation. It's way more about how she can responsibly use her power and deal with the trauma that she inherits from her legacy. But while Raybearer and Redemptor were coming out, we had the Black Lives Matter protests and we had COVID, which shone so much light on the plight of essential workers. And a lot of people, when they say essential workers, they mean healthcare workers, but the term actually means any worker who is so essential to society running, they have to go work even while there's a deadly pandemic. And so many of those people were minimum wage paid people or less. It was like the people who are undocumented picking all our food. It was sanitation workers. It was domestic workers, right? And so I got so fixated on that contradictory reality. So the people who are clearly the most necessary to society are the ones we pay the least, maybe with the exception of actual doctors, right? And it was so ludicrous to me, even though I knew it to some degree, that to go back into the world of Raybearer and be talking about all of these, you know, wealthy, powerful teenagers, I couldn't stop thinking about the lives of all the people who served them and the lives of all the workers in Aritsar. And I knew that if I returned, I would want to explore that exact same world from the bottom of the power totem instead of from the top. So that's how The Maid and the Crocodile got brewing. I also wanted to write a Howl's Moving Castle book because I'm obsessed with Howl's Moving Castle. So
I watched that one.
Yeah. And then also Zuri as a character is, I guess that is a mild spoiler, is fascinating to me. He's got a little bit of Scarlet Pimpernel going on, where it's like he pretends to be, he's like a wealthy, very powerful aristocrat who pretends to be stupid so he can aid revolutions in secret. But a lot of that comes from his deep trauma watching his royal family get assassinated one after the other. And the only reason he's alive is because he pretended to be stupid and controllable. So I just kind of quietly thought it was a waste to actually kill him at the end of Redemptor. And I initially did. And then like literally we were in the last stages of the edit process. Like the book was going to print and I emailed my editor and said, I'm killing him. Just so you know, like I'm actually going to make this really vague. There's no body. Like
that's amazing.
So if I have time to come back to this world. So yeah, those are all of the initial sparks for the Maid and the Crocodile.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit when you're talking about Zuri, but you do this thing in your writing and in these books that I think is really awesome, which you like present people in plain sight, like this is who they are, and you even tell the readers this is who they are, but you kind of make readers think that there's something like more nefarious going on or that we're not really getting the whole story. Because I know when I was reading the duology and then also a little bit with Zuri too, I'm like, there's gotta I'm getting a bad feeling there's gotta be something more here. But we learn as we're reading that there's more to the stories of these characters and they're not simply just a good or a bad person, that it's not so black and white. So, what's it like for you to write this type of shift in viewpoint for readers?
Well, I've never been a fan of simple black and white dichotomies in terms of ethics or, well, I mean, there are some things that I do think are pretty black and white in ethics, but in terms of identities and people, right? I think that there has been a push in YA to do something that sounds complex but actually isn't, which is the morally gray character. Um, and to me, it's way more interesting instead of watching a character decide to be selfish for complicated reasons. It's way more interesting to watch good people try to stay good and be good. I do have villains that are really complex, in my opinion. And those are awesome, but they never tend to take center stage as much as really good people trying to be good because goodness isn't boring. It's actually
Mm.
incredibly complicated. It's something you actively have to do and maintain. Whereas selfishness is just giving in a way, So it makes sense to me to write complicated antagonists, but I generally will always be more interested in these characters that are good, which is why in the Raybearer series especially, there's a lot of focus on all of these friendships between these teenagers who are good people, um, who just struggle,
Hmm.
right? And who find their safety and comfort in those relationships with each other.
Oh,
You do a really great job because like the friendships are so dynamic.
yeah.
And even following into the Maid and the Crocodile, like I love this because Sade is a woman who's trying to survive as a regular person, kind of like what you were saying with the, necessary workers. So, like, what was it like kind of building a complex character who we hadn't seen before kind of come into the forefront and playing with the dynamics in, from the Raybearer series to this?
Well, I keep trying to remember how Sade's personality got formed, and I realized that she's an organic mix of a lot of different kinds of heroines I've loved over time. I'm a big sucker for stories about young women who are almost comically practical in impossible circumstances. Um, and that can be in a comedic sense, but it can also be in a very um, self-deprecating in an unhealthy sense. You see that a lot in um, Sophie from Howl's Moving Castle in both the book and the film, where her curse is getting turned into an old woman, and she doesn't lift her curse because it's similar to how she saw herself anyway, as kind of
Hmm.
just like someone who was boring and lackluster. You see a lot of that in things that Charlotte Bronte tends to write, where you have someone with an intense sense of agency of themselves, and at the same time, fairly low self esteem in certain areas. I really like Villette, which is one of geez, no, one of the last things she wrote. Um, I don't think any of what she wrote was bad. And a lot of people more famously know that with Jane Eyre, right?
Mhm.
Jane Eyre, while problematic, is a really milestone feminist text in the way that it insists on the agency of this person who at the same time all the while talks about how like silly she is for even thinking that she should expect any kind of like beautiful life, right? Because she's practical. She's like, I'm not pretty, I'm poor. Who cares about me? I need to
Yeah.
give me a task to do. Like, let me be busy. So, all of those women that I've read about and how I related to them as a young woman who struggled with self-esteem as a teenager kind of gave birth to Sade. Um, I'd say Tarisai is kind of the child of my anxiety. Like child Tarisai has this deep, deep sense of being wrong inside, and just even as much as she loves her friends and they love her, she's just always afraid they're gonna find out. Like, yes, they love me, but they're gonna find out that actually I'm not worthy of love, actually. And so that's like my anxiety child. And Sade is more like my I don't know, my self-deprecating child, where it's like whenever you're in that state of mind where you do have a fairly low view of yourself, but you're also very at peace with it, which is a really unique combination. It's not a healthy combination, but it's really unique because some people are
Yeah.
really destructive with low self esteem. Other people are really depressed with low self esteem. Other people marry their low self esteem and move on. And those people are really interesting to me because they're also doing something very unhealthy, but they wield it as a way to cope with their situation, this intense unhealthy acceptance of their circumstances, right?
Yeah, I feel like we're all Tarisai and Sade, just like how good is our self-esteem at this moment? Can we be self-deprecating about it or not? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up because when I was reading this, so like obviously the Maid and the Crocodile, like you said, deals with a lot of like class and power issues, but there's even like moments where Mama Dele has discussions about like why people are lower class or what puts people into specific classes. But there's a line fairly early on in the book where Sade mentions that she approached powerful people differently. And I thought that was so interesting because like as a reader, I thought that Sade was so powerful herself. So why was it important for you to like show these differences in what it means to be powerful versus privileged and to be upper class in this book?
Well, I think that there's a difference between ability and um what's the word I'm looking for? I think there's a difference between ability and adaptability and privilege, right? So Sade is a highly adaptable person. Like, her ability to just assess a situation, no matter how dangerous and scary it is, and do what the most practical thing to do is formidable. In a piece of kind of unreleased fan fiction about the crocodile meeting Sade for the first time that I wrote, that is one of the things, the moments he keeps going back to is how she walked into his shrine expecting to die, because in her weird self deprecating practicality, she was like, well, if I run, he'll chase me, and that's useless. So I guess I should say goodbye to my dreams of living in the city. I'm going to say goodbye to Oluwana like as I walk to my death, and I hope it doesn't hurt, and go in. And he's just like, that is the most insane and courageous thing I have ever heard, right? Like, on one hand, it's really unhealthy and shows to low self-esteem, but it actually is not a cowardly thing to do at
Hmm.
all. Sade is not a coward. Um, and so oh geez, what was the question? I was
Just
going
like
somewhere with that.
why it was important to show the differences between power and privilege and
Right, right. So I think it's interesting how your agency, or not your agency, but your adaptability and your abilities do not necessarily equate to power, right?
Mhm.
It depends on where you're placed in society. You can be the most capable person possible, but if the people in control of your resources are more powerful than you, it doesn't end up meaning much.
Right.
And one thing that The Maid and the Crocodile kind of gently challenges is the idea of your self actualization being the key to your liberation. And I know those were a bunch of kind of like, academic lefty words, but what I mean by that is I don't think that learning you have worth and having high self esteem is enough to save you in a system that is that built on your exploitation. It takes you uniting with other people in order to actually defeat those things, right? And so Zuri was half right and half wrong in his like trying to make Sade into this, like you have to like see your own worth and you have to see that you're amazing and you're better than all of these nobles and stuff. He was right in one sense, but he was wrong in the sense that like you can't have individual charismatic heroes saving people. At the end of the
Mhm.
day, what you have to have is a community of people that come together and fight back and rebel. The way Sade puts it is like join the real revolution, the one where you're fighting alongside people and nobody will ever know your names because the
Mhm.
actual heroes were the collective group rather than like
Right.
one military leader like Zuri, or even what he was trying to make her into, which is one charismatic, almost like Katniss figure. Like,
Mhm.
like Zuri would be obsessed with the idea of a Katniss, right? Um, so that was kind of the point. Talking about how as much ability as Sade had, her power was actually not significant when divorced from all of this kind of collective unity. And that ended up being what she did that was powerful, was uniting these groups of people to actually have spines and fight back.
Well, and there is something I loved about your book because it's it's a soapbox I get on all the time. Like my mom was a grocery store manager, and you talk like Sade in this book, she kind of like chastises Zuri because she's sitting there talking about how he has this view of like the working class where he's gonna come in and save them all. And she has this moment where she's like, people don't need to be saved. Like real work has value. These people have value, and you're
Mhm.
devaluing them by saying that someone has to save them. And it's like such a poignant thing that I don't think gets talked about a lot and like not talked a lot about in YA. So I loved those like deep, meaningful themes you had in there.
Thank you. Yeah, I find that really interesting about Zuri, and it's a common thing you see in educated activist circles. Often the people who are most educated don't come from an incredibly disadvantaged background. There might be some things, like, if we're people of color or if, we're in the queer community, where we have these intersections of identity that make us experience inequality. But by the time you're in these academic settings, it's likely that you haven't experienced kind of like a working class existence to the degree that other people in your demographic have.
Hmm.
So you end up having these discourses with a lot of people who are actually really out of touch with what the priorities of an average working class person is. You know, for example, hopefully this isn't too political, but back when, um, oh, what's his name? The guy from Vermont was running for president.
Bernie
Bernie
Sanders.
Bernie
Sanders.
Sanders was running for president, right? There were so many people, and I supported a lot of his policies, but there were so many people saying that he was the voice of the working class. And then they were shocked when all of the working class didn't vote for him because what the working class currently prioritizes. It might be different than like a more academic view
Hmm.
of the
Mhm.
working class, right? So whether or not you're saying that they're voting against their own interests, they vote the way they vote because of who they are and what their everyday experiences of the world are. And so to be tone deaf to that and say that you're the voice of a working class who you're not listening to is a big contradiction you see in these circles. So Zuri is very much that. And the way he unwittingly disparages the working class is something that I have had to work on too, because I think a lot of stories that valorize working class people give them a happy ending that involves them leaving the working class, right?
Mhm.
It's the happy ending for this impoverished person is that they get the opportunity to go to school and be something else. Now, I'm all for everyone getting to go to school. Education is so important, way beyond what job capacity or potential you have. But the fact is, we're always going to need maids. We're
Hmm.
going to
Yeah.
need sanitation workers. We're always going to need, like, I mean, maybe until like technology gets to a certain degree, like people to pick our food and like clean it and like cook it, you
Hmm.
know, And so, no matter how much schooling people have, these jobs are still necessary and vital. And so, they should be treated with so much dignity and respect. They should be
Yeah.
seen as a valid, happy ending, right? So, when Sade says, like, she's suited to labor but not servanthood, that's what she means. She's like, look, I don't mind cleaning stuff. I actually enjoy cleaning stuff. It's just I don't like all of the lack of dignity that comes with it.
Mhm.
And it was interesting talking about this particular point when I went to Nigeria last year for a literature festival. They had me out to Ake in Lagos to talk about the Maid of the Crocodile. And the reality is, many of the people in that audience had house girls like Sade. Like
Yeah.
Sade's situation is based on a very real class dynamic in West Africa and in like lots of countries throughout history. And so to get up there on the stage and just kind of be like, hey, so their lives are, not something to be escaped from unless you've made those conditions bad.
Mhm.
Um, it was something that I don't think I'd heard discussed at that festival, at least. I'm sure there's plenty of leftist pro working class movements in Nigeria. But at that particular literature festival, with these like brains who kind of belonged to somewhat of an upper class in Nigeria, here I come with my book that's just like, yeah, so my book says that sanitation work is actually super valid, you know?
People need
And
to do it, so
exactly. And if people need to do it and will always have a need for the job, then it should be a job that people can sustainably do for their whole lives,
Mhm.
for a living wage and with the respect of the community around them.
Well,
Um,
you do this other thing too in the book where you show that there have been these reforms made by the Raybearers, but Sade is someone who was supposed to really benefit, but she kind of ends up struggling a bit too. So I think that's a unique way to portray the system as well, that even when there's all these reforms being made, there's still people who are going to struggle with like kind of the growing pains of what's being done.
right. It was really tempting to give a fairy tale happy ending to the world of Eretzar, especially Oluwan, because I love Tarisai and her council siblings so much. I love Dio that I wanted to create a world in which all of their struggles and their suffering and journey, kind of made the world they were hoping for. But I didn't think that that did justice to how these things actually generally happen. Because if I'd done that, it would be giving credence to the idea that you can have one superhuman justice lawyer that fixes everything.
Mhm.
And that isn't true. Tarisai is an incredible person, but she is one person, so is Dio. And even though she's very, very powerful, you're still going to have blind spots if you are that much separated in power from the people that you're trying to help, right? Sade tells that to Tarisai explicitly. She's just like, look, you couldn't help not knowing it because you were too big and I was too small. I know you would have cared if you'd known, but you physically could not know because of how big you were compared to me. That it's like, an elephant stepping on an ant. They didn't mean to, but because of the size difference, it's gonna happen,
Mhm.
and that's awful. So,
Well,
just with Tarisai coming to terms with that, you see a slightly more mature Tarisai with kind of a goal of, she even says it briefly, dismantling even her own monarchy. She's like, look, I want a world in which Raybearers aren't necessary, because the community is so good at supporting itself and supporting each other. So, yeah, it was a hard choice because I wanted to leave the world of Raybear with so much sunshine and roses. But I think it was a more meaningful choice to show, like, hey, there are going to be a lot of growing pains. You are going to see some really cool reforms, like this place that used to be a snooty Crown Park is now like this really beautiful, practical area where working class people hang out. And that makes the nobility angry. But it did happen. She did accomplish it. And Sade talks about how Tarisai and Dio's reforms actually did help thousands and thousands of children,
yeah.
but she was too old, right?
Mhm.
Like she was already too far down this system that it was too late for her and people like her, and she still has to go and live her whole life. Um, so at the end, Sade kind of low-key invents community college. She's like, hey, what if we could like, what if there was a really accessible trade school? So like people like me who like were raised in the gutter wouldn't just have to, accept the first, work that we're given. Um, but yeah, it was a hard but necessary choice, I think.
I think it
Well,
was really thoughtful, honestly. Like
yeah.
I think it's a thoughtful choice to make where it's something that you deeply care about your work and you want to just give it a happy ending, but to kind of make it deeper and add more to it. I think it was a really thoughtful choice.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
it makes sense in the context of the books because, like, something I loved about Raybearer and Redemptor is kind of the look at like you can't let the fact that you're not going to do it perfectly keep you from trying to do something. And I think that that
Mhm.
just lends itself to the Maid and the Crocodile, where it's like, yeah, Tarisai didn't let it stop her from doing something, and it wasn't perfect. Like that was always the
Mhm.
message.
Yeah, no, not even close. I had so much fun giving little hints as to what the Raybearer characters' lives were like. Unfortunately, there was so much I didn't get to put in just because anytime the Raybearer characters are in the room, it's so easy for them to suck up all the air, and this is so much Sade's story that I couldn't do that. But yeah, like you get to see just Sanjeet for a minute in his new role as like a High Lord medic, where basically he's in charge of like, safety and public health, like in this empire to the point, and to get to do hands-on stuff to the point where like he would be a first responder to like a
Mhm.
big magical building collapsing.
Yeah.
I thought I wished I could have shown more of their lives because there was a lot of happy ending to be had. It's just like for Sade, that's not really her concern. It's
She has
not her
way more
concern
important
that
things to be
like
concerned with.
right, yeah, it's like it's all well and good that, the emperor and empress and all of those kids who are extremely powerful got to have happy endings, but Sade has like some more pressing concerns. So
Yeah,
you
fair
didn't get
enough.
to see a lot of that. Yeah.
So your book handle well, all of your books handle really interesting family relationships, but especially those between like parents and children. And I really appreciated how you worked in like the complicatedness of parental guilt and the desires that parents have for their children and how really complex all of that can be. So as an adult writing these books and writing them for a younger audience, what was it like to create all of these relationships, knowing what it was like to be a teenager yourself and trying to write them for a younger audience?
Well, the funny thing is, nobody believes me when I say that I didn't intend to write about like mommy issues and potential and like parental trauma, because the way Ray Bear was written, which is like has huge like parental trauma. It was just me as a teenager and young adult being like, moms, right? And everyone else being like, no. So that's what's called a uniquely like abusive situation, right? So you write stuff you're familiar with. And, it wasn't just my experience. It was like just a lot of the women and girls I tended to be close to. We all had these very complicated relationships with our parents. So I thought what we went through was just that's how you write these things, and learning that that is generally not everyone's experience. And so I was representing these unique like themes of trauma in this book was funny to realize as I was like finishing up these books, right? um but with Mama Dele's relationship with Dele, um I thought that was actually really interesting. In some ways, Mama Dele is one of my more obviously villainous characters, right?
Hmm.
Like I tend to write my antagonists with a lot more complex sympathies than Mama Dele has, because Mama Dele is just such a deeply selfish person.
Yeah.
But her little bit of complexity is just how accurately she can clock her own daughter in a lot of ways. Like the
Hmm.
reason why she's able to hurt Dele easily is that she accurately assesses that Dele's abilities to endure hardship is completely out of step with her values that she like talks about all the time. She's definitely like the rich liberal daughter, right? Like the
Hmm.
the the, the liberal daughter of like the wealthy elite who's
Mm-hmm.
like, this is wrong. And, when faced with the actual challenge of giving up that comfort and trying to make reparations through giving up her own comfort, that's actually something she'd struggle with. And Mama Dele knows that, which is why Mama Dele herself is at peace with her own selfishness.
Mhm.
Like in some ways, it's like in some ways she's wildly dishonest with herself. Like she tells herself she's not an abusive mother, and she is. And in other ways, she's way more honest than Dele is in a way. She's like, no, yeah, I like being wealthy. The fact that we lost all our money because of this new regime that's making reparations really sucks. And I want that back. And daughter, you're not going to survive unless you marry someone rich like I did. So suck it up. Like, um, I had fun kind of making a choice that Mama Dele, by the way, is not like the least bit homophobic. Like her main
She's very
problem with
pragmatic. She's
Yeon
Yeah.
pragmatic.
is that she's like, as far as Mama Dele knows, Yeon is poor.
Mhm.
Yeon does actually have the ear of like the most wealthy and powerful woman in the world, but she doesn't know that, right? So it's she's just, and also, I tried to mimic some more realistic conventions about queer relationships in these old empires where it's like queerness was very much a thing, but often it was a thing for the privileged.
Mhm.
So it's like it wasn't seen as inherently dirty as much as if you are from the lower classes, then it doesn't make sense for you to go against these very established conventional things that will ensure your household security, right? So Della is like, well, like the Raybearers have like, and like all of these lords and ladies have like lovers of whatever gender they want. And Mama Della is like, yeah, because they're powerful.
Mhm.
We're very teetering on the brink here. You need to be as conventional as possible. Find a man, find a wealthy man, have children to secure your position. Like, just stop it. You're in a fantasy world, right? So I do think that while Mama Dele is more obviously selfish and evil than my usual villains, she even has her stripes of um, practicality.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, I think we see a certain version of her through Sade, which would have been unique with like Tarisai, who would have just walked into the room and been powerful and kind of like
Mhm.
implemented structural change, which you can also see through their hollows, because like Tarisai is someone who can see memories or take them out and like relieve them, where like Sade's is very much more physical. And I love the idea of the soul, like the dust being something that could be
The
removed
silt.
if
Yeah.
you could just accept yourself and move forward. And she's like, but people don't do that. It's like,
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was very much one of the ways in which she was directly inspired by Sophie from Howl's Moving Castle, right? In which Sophie had this power to solve her own curse, but she was already so submissive to this idea in her mind that she wouldn't bother. And Sade could physically like clean some of the stuff off her and give herself another chance. But it's complicated. In some ways, Sade was wrong, and in other ways, she's right. On one hand, it's wrong to give in to these things. On the other hand, if no structural change happens, then all of that spirit silt is going to come right back because it's made of the expectations of other people on you. So she was like, why bother? And the thing is, she should have bothered. She should have still fought back, but she's not being stupid. She's actually being extremely practical to a painful degree. And that's what I think makes her character kind of unique when you think about YA heroines, which are usually very agency, like embracing your agency is the solution to all problems, which weirdly is actually a very conservative idea. It's like really bootstrappy if you think about it, right? The power was in you all along is actually a bootstraps narrative.
Hmm.
The power was in us all along is not a bootstraps narrative because that's very much about challenging systemic things. But you specifically, yeah. um,
I feel like it
so
also is like with the curse eating too. I feel like I also took away like this idea that like there's this heaviness that she was taking on by trying to do so many things for other people, like even for Mama Dele and for herself too, like trying to improve her own situation through curse eating and everything. It was just like this heaviness that she was then taking on by kind of stretching herself a little too thin, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, One of my favorite moments for Sade and her journey is, of course, like the birth scene with Kwabene and smaller Sade. um, because I like that even with her practicality, even with her knowing how many constraints the world was going to put on this baby the way it was put on her, she refused to give in for someone else. She's like,
Mhm.
no, actually, this baby deserves to be brought into the world in a clean, beautiful environment with joy and none of these terrible expectations. And that allowed her to click in her mind to say, like, wait, so also I should have that should have also been for me. No matter how impractical it is, no matter how implausible it is that I'll be treated with respect, I should be trying as hard as I can to make this environment for myself as well. Um, and I really it's interesting because it's not super dramatic a thing to happen in order to make that switch in her brain. I think if this was a more traditionally epic YA novel, it would have been some big quest that makes that happen. But because of the purposely insular vibe of The Maid and the Crocodile, I wanted it to be a very intimate, significant thing that happens that makes that shift in her mind. The world map at the beginning of the Raybearer books stretches against like across these whole continents, across the whole city, and then on purpose, the world map for Maid and the Crocodile is a single building
Hmm.
because when you are poor, your life has to be more constrained to your circumstances. The whole fancy lodestone travel system that was a like a crucial plot point of the Raybearer books you barely even hear about because those things cost money that Sade doesn't
Mhm.
have. So she's never seen most of the empire. She's never seen like a lot of the rest of Oluwan. She's seen like the little village where she grew up and then the
Mhm.
bush. And then Oluwan City when she was taken there by the government, as just like as part of these new, reforms and stuff. So that's on purpose, these like smaller insular character moments.
I love that.
Yeah. I also really love it because you mentioned the part with the baby and she has this like kind of like this moment where she realizes what her mom meant when she was in the village and she was like, "You don't mind that my daughter did this thing that was in the previous novels that you brought back in, you know?" But she's like, "You mind that she wouldn't make herself small." And it's this moment where like Sade like realizes how small she's been making herself and it's so poignant. So I was so impressed with that.
Thank you. Yeah, those chapters were really heartbreaking to write. And it was really hard to balance them out with the rest of the book because believe it or not, I was actually setting out to write a cozy fantasy novel.
Oh my
But
gosh.
when you write about someone from that level of economic, you know, lack. Like it's you're inevitably going to have these heartbreaking stories as to how they got
Mhm.
there, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it was really special to go back to that scene from Raybearer in which that little girl only served to further the character development of Sanjit and Tarisai, right? Like the little
Mhm.
girl runs away, she's afraid of Sanjit, and Tarisai is able to publicly refute the idea of Sanjit being a monster by this very significant representative act she does with crossing the fire for him. And all of that is so meaningful and significant to those characters. And in the meantime, a little girl's entire life has just been ruined, and they don't even know
Mhm.
because of this systemic privilege they've been given, where anyone even being publicly rude to them could result in their lives being ruined for the rest. And they have no idea and they can't. They were
Mhm.
children. They were like 15, 16. But that's the nature of systemic privilege, where it's like, even if it's not your fault, that's what happens when you allow these societies to be
Mhm.
here. Like you're without even trying, you could be ruining someone's life,
Yeah.
right? Um, I think that's happened, on different gender and racial levels as well in real life for sure, where it's like even if all of the parties involved were well-meaning, if this is a system that was set up to benefit one of you, then you're not actually helping a person necessarily unless you do more to dismantle the system. Um, Kind of
Yeah.
like, well-meaning people who gave poor people really expensive things, not knowing that that would automatically mean that they'd get in trouble because it looks like they stole it,
Yes.
right? Because you
Mhm.
haven't done anything to actually change, the environment, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something I really love. So this book has some excellent representation in Sade because she's a character who's disabled, having injured her foot in a mill working as a child, and she's a cane user. She has vitiligo, and so she has a different appearance, and she also can't read. So I think it's like really important representation in a character that I found really powerful. But I kind of wondered why you chose to give your main character this disability and her skin condition, and why you chose to make her someone who can't read.
Well, lots of different reasons. So I knew I wanted to write a book with disability rep once I realized what a huge lack there is in YA fiction, especially about that. Um, it's rooted in a single panel that I sat in at a Nebula conference, the Nebula Awards
Hmm.
and the SIFWA Society. It's like the Science Fiction and Fantasy Society. I went to a panel that was about disability just out of curiosity. And the way it opened my eyes to how terrible disability rep is, not just in its absence, but also when it is portrayed, it's like even so-called progressive writers have such a deep fear of disability that I think it's easier for them to cope with it if you pretend that people with like physical deformities or disabilities somehow deserved it or earned it or something,
Hmm.
right? Because then that makes it seem like, well, that won't never happen to me because I'm a good person. It's really weird, but it's the only reason I can think that we would keep doing this, right?
Hmm.
Because I went to that panel, and then that very evening I went and saw like Detective Pikachu in theaters, right, with my husband. And in that movie, this is like the same day I learned for the first time at a panel that disability rep sucks. The main villain of Detective Pikachu is a guy who is evil because he's in a wheelchair.
Oh.
Like it's not just that the villain is evil and in a wheelchair, which would be bad enough if that's the only disabled person on screen and he happens to be evil. His whole backstory is that because he was disabled and had to be in a wheelchair, now he's evil. And I'm just like, so this is a movie for children. And if I can go to a panel on disability and pick a random movie and have disability rep this bad, how many movies and TV shows have I seen where it was this terrible all along and I just didn't notice?
Hmm.
Um, because like I noticed in all of the reviews of that movie, that wasn't even mentioned. There were lots of people saying, "Oh, it's a bad movie for this reason and this reason," but nobody even noticed how specifically horrific that was, right?
I
Because
mean,
none
we
of us
probably don't
think
want to get
about
into all the comic book characters that were
Oh,
disabled
geez.
and then,
right.
became horribly evil.
Yeah.
Right, even just like, Scar from Lion King. He's bad because he's disfigured, right?
Hmm.
And I know that because millennials are kind of freaky. Now we've all decided Scar is hot. But um
We always do
generally
the
as a
180.
child, yes, as a child, we knew Scar was bad specifically because he was disfigured. Right? That was one of our first big visual clues.
Hmm.
And as complicated as my feelings about Disney are, they have advanced so much from that time. Where
Yeah.
now you have villains. I know by this time she's an old villain, like Mother Gothel from
Yep.
Tangled,
Hmm.
where she's so evil and she's so bubbly and gaslighty,
Hmm.
right? Or what's his name? Hans? It's
Prince
Oh yeah,
Hans
Hans.
and
Prince
Frozen?
Hans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like now Disney villains are like Disney is teaching children, I think, a really valuable lesson in that a villain is not someone
Mhm.
who looks obviously scary,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, rarely are the people most likely to hurt children, especially are people in their close lives who appear to love them,
Right.
right? So, on disability, I knew after that panel that eventually I'd want to write a character with that disability, with a disability. I have many invisible disabilities, so I
Same.
also had um, a personal connection with Sade. I have many vaguely diagnosed autoimmune things, which happens so much with women where they're like, well, it's not quite MS, but yeah, you feel crappy all the time, and sometimes you're going to pass out, and sometimes your skin's going to feel like it hurts and it's burning, and we don't know. um, I also have like visual disabilities, like a botched surgery means I'm almost legally blind in this
Oh my
eye.
gosh.
I have, as not major as it seems, like really like kind of gnarly like bone bunion things are genetic in my family, which meant that walking and running was actually often very painful for me growing up.
Mm.
And some of my experience with cane use is because I did get like one of those bunions removed. And so I had to, walk with like a crutch and a cane, which, while that's not the same thing as people who are lifelong cane users, it did mean that I had some more accurate ideas of how Sade's cane works. I've
Mhm.
gotten that feedback from cane users. They were like, we thought you must be a cane user because the way you even describe like the way your wrist hurts and the way you actually have to keep using it or else it actually ends up being more painful for you later. I did actually ask for a sensitivity reader for the cane stuff just in case though. Fran Wild, this amazing Hugo winning award-winning cane using author, was the sensitivity reader for Maid. um, and no, that was really great. So for that disability access, all of that went into the book, of just being a girl or a woman with disabilities and how practical you have to be about your own pain and discomfort
Yeah.
is such a sad reality that I thought needed more representation.
Well, I
Um,
I appreciate it because even when you're talking about like in the book, Sade's talking about like the chronic pain that she deals with. I'm somebody that deals with chronic pain too, and her
yep.
even mentioning like, oh, it's gonna be a lot to go up the stairs, and they're like, oh, can you do it? And Sade's like, well, yes, but like, it sucks. Like I'm gonna do
Mm,
it. It was very
yeah,
relatable.
thank you. And it was of course extremely important to me that her disability didn't go away at the end of the book in the same way that
Mhm.
her happy
Hmm.
ending was not stopping being a laborer, right?
Right.
Like Tare Sai offered Sade that happy ending. It's just like, because Tare Sai is a great person. She's like, you're totally right. I have huge blind spots. Come live with me at the palace. Teach me everything. I will totally listen to you. And Sade was like, well, on one hand, that's how I could make a lot of impact. And on the other,
Mhm.
that's just not the life I want to live.
Yeah.
Why do I have to give up my working class life that is meaningful and that I love instead of you guys coming down here and learning something?
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's why should I have to do that? Um, but also her happy ending with the inn itself becoming a place that is easy for Sade
Yeah.
to live in was really important.
Yeah.
With Zuri building her an elevator and kind of inventing a shower.
Hmm.
um, that was really important to me. I think one slightly hard thing to deal with within this world is that it's almost always bad disability rep to have the disability magically cured. But in a
Mhm.
world where there is magic, you have to think about that. Because,
Hmm.
even as I was writing this book, I was like, so this is a world where Kira exists, Kira of Blessed Valley, who has this incredible healing hallow. And yet I don't want this to be a book in which Sade's like, foot gets magically
I'm
cured,
fine. Yeah.
right? So I kind of just got rid of Kira. She was busy. Kira was in Songland, right? And even the nature of Kira's ability, it's not like a cure all. Like with a really
Right.
old disability like Sade's, I'm sure Kira could help, but it wouldn't be like a brand new foot. I don't think that that's something Kira could have done anyway. But I just didn't want to deal with it. I was just like, no, for this to be a good disability rep story, even if there are people who have these abilities in the book, I don't want that to get in the way of what the message should be, especially for disabled people reading this story.
Right.
Um,
I
Now
feel
the
like
bit of
Sade
lag,
has like a unique relationship with like religion and cults and like the Raybearers in general anyway, so she might not necessarily feel comfortable with being healed by one
Yeah.
of the Raybearers either. So
that's true. She is deathly afraid of anointed
Mhm.
ones, and that's something she kind of barely gets over by the end of the book. So I'm sure that would make her deeply uncomfortable. Um, and I think that Tarisai has learned her lesson and she wouldn't push it. Like
Mhm.
Tarisai already has kind of a lesson she has to learn with disabled people with her Akorin, her personal griot, who has a head injury, and Tarisai is like, I could make it all go away. Like I could like erase all of your like traumatic memories. And this kid is like, no, you'd be erasing me. That's actually really
Yeah.
messed up. You'd pressure me to do that. So I think that Tarisai wouldn't push that point too hard anyway, unless, you know. Um, but
Which is also very
yeah,
important for disability representation, as some people are like, I am whole as I am. You do not need to
mhm.
fix me. Like,
yes, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of variation on that within disability, right? Where it's like it's so complicated because on one hand, I think it's criminal that we haven't pushed for more research to treat especially women with chronic conditions. And that's on purpose. Like they didn't even start testing medications like painkillers on women until after I was born.
Yeah.
Right. So on one hand, I don't accept the state of my body. I'm like, yeah, I should have I need treatment. And like, yeah, I don't think that this is actually an acceptable thing I should have to live with my whole life. And
Mhm.
on the other hand, knowing how much of my life I will live with these things, especially with mental health things as well. Like I struggle with like really chronic like depression and anxiety and all that stuff. To be able to have dignity and see myself as like a worthy and person, even as I have all these things, is I think what's really important there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But of course, there are other axes of disability where it's more complicated because the disability enabled them to build a beautiful culture that, in and of itself, has value, like deaf culture,
Yeah.
right? Like there are definitely aspects of being deaf that are completely a disability, but because of what they built, it's like it doesn't make sense to put all of that yeah, like so it can be more complicated because on the one
Mhm.
hand being deaf allowed them to make something that they couldn't have made or wouldn't
Mhm.
Yep.
have made if they were hearing. And that's real, right? And
Yeah.
beautiful. And a lot of people in that particular disabled community would say that they would never choose to be hearing because the kind of expression that comes from signing and different aspects of deaf culture is something they wouldn't trade for the world, which makes complete sense. It's kind of, in a way, it's like being Black American, right?
Yeah.
I don't like, I think that what happened to West Africans in the transatlantic slave trade is one of the most horrific things to happen to people in the history of humankind. At the same time, I wouldn't trade Black American culture itself for anything. And that was
Yeah.
built because they were ripped from their West African
Right.
culture. That's why they built something new,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? And it's something that was so beautiful that it's been exploited and stolen, like from the moment it was made throughout.
Yeah.
Like every time Black Americans make something, it gets reproduced somewhere else in the world, right? So I think it's
Repackaged.
that
Like,
complicated.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Can I ask you one
disability
more?
is
Go ahead.
no,
Go
go
ahead.
for it. I was just gonna say disability is so rich and varied and so under explored
Yeah.
in
Mhm.
YA fiction, especially.
Can I ask you one more question and then we'll let
Mhm.
you go? We'll wrap up. But something that I really appreciate in the Raybearer duology and also the Maid and the Crocodile is this focus on the importance of stories and sharing them and finding the truth in them and kind of being writers of our own stories. So I was kind of wondering what it means to you to be a storyteller and what do you hope that your readers take away from your stories?
Well, stories are always how I processed the world as a child and a teenager. So there's something very organic to it that makes it a little hard to describe why I'm a storyteller. Because I didn't choose it for some necessarily noble cause. It's just the way I processed my world. I was an undiagnosed, very neurodivergent child, and so narratives are how I made sense of anything. I would like literally put whatever was happening into a story in my head, and then I could cope with it.
Mhm.
So for me, stories themselves are useful in and of themselves, right? Just as a way of enjoying being alive, is telling stories and making art out of what happens. But what they can be used as a tool for is spreading ideas in a package that kind of can get past some of the barriers we would and prejudices we would have against certain ideas, right? Like I was made into a feminist by probably hundreds of kids' books that never said the word feminist or girl power, right? Because of the way the stories were, it was so hard to see girls and women as anything but main characters and people by the time I was an adult, that attempts to make that not the case just literally wouldn't compute with my brain. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I've been in the heads of smart, capable women since I could read, women and girls, right? So it's just, I'm never going to buy into the idea that, I was meant to mainly be a supporting character in a man's life. Um, and so I think that is the power of stories. And it's what I hope to accomplish with my work. Um, Often for children and teens, but eventually probably for adults as well.
Well, that's
Awesome.
amazing.
We love it.
As a quick final question, can you tell people what you are reading, watching, and or enjoying right now?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So, the finale was a little while ago, but my husband and I are obsessed with Severance.
Oh my gosh, me
Um,
too.
yeah, I love Severance so much. I have seen Sinners in theaters 4 times.
Yep.
It is an absolute masterpiece of storytelling. Sinners is what happens when you have a director that knows how to delegate for talent, because every single identity represented in Sinners, whether that's like a historic setting, like people from Clarksdale, or not even just like racially and genderly, but literally like geographically, right? Like these specific Chinese shopkeepers
Yep.
in Mississippi, the way he always picks experts instead of just like, so he'll have the vision for it, but he will always hire experts. And then the resulting art is just mind-bogglingly gorgeous,
It's so
right?
good. I
And
saw it on
he's
actual film and I was like blown
oh,
away by how yeah.
so cool. Yeah, it's no, I love it so much. I love the music. I love the character arcs. So definitely still obsessed with that. In terms of books, let's see, what have I been reading? Um, Lately, I have been leaning a little more nonfiction. I've been trying to make my way through A People's History of the United
Oh, wow.
States by Howard Zinn. Really, really important book. Um, I also started Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which is a book about Nigerians during COVID.
Oh, wow.
And that's been really interesting. It's just, and she's very much like a novel of manners kind of person, kind of like Jane Austen. So a lot of her work is about really specific, intimate interactions between people. And
Mhm.
like right now I'm in a part of that book where it's like the main character is in her younger 20s and trying to impress this guy who is so like he's like one of those, I don't know, he's like a really pretentious academic, and the way she makes herself smaller to impress him is so frustrating and so
Oh,
achingly realistic. Like
yeah.
you have either been this woman or you knew her, and I just love books like
That's
that.
amazing.
So that's what I've been checking out recently. I also, I guess the thing I've really been reading over and over is my newest book that's coming out in spring of next year. I haven't officially announced it yet, but I don't care. It's called The Genie Game. It's It's my first
Beautiful.
middle grade book. And it is set in an alternate reality United States that has been taken over by three major corporations that openly run everything, including sort of the government. And all of the major cities have been renamed for these corporations. So Los Angeles, where the story takes place, is called Gloss Angeles. It's owned by Gloss and Gleam Beauty and Entertainment. And there are different buildings that serve as bottles for genies. So
Ah,
basically, if you work for the magical end of this corporation, the secret magical end, you will be imprisoned in a bottle, which is a building, and you're only like allowed to leave it on wish granting business to like generate magic to power these companies.
that's
So
beautiful.
our 13-year-old heroine goes to look for her missing sister and accidentally becomes trapped as the genie of a bottle, and her bottle is a boba shop in Venice Beach.
Oh,
So
That's
that
beautiful.
is the genie game, and they all compete like who can grant the most wishes and like get up high on the scoreboard. And if you get up high on the scoreboard, the corporation rewards you. Like it's a very uh obviously kind of consumeristic capitalism critical book for children. And it's probably the most humorous thing I've written, which was really fun. Like I really
So
wanted to lean
fun.
into the humor. So that's the genie game. There will be a second book. We'll see about a third, but that's my next thing for
That's
middle
And that
grade.
amazing.
comes out next year?
Yes, it comes out in the spring. I believe it comes out in April.
I'll be getting
Okay.
that for my
Yeah.
11-year-old
I'm
nephew at the time. So,
I'm gonna be getting it for
Oh yeah.
myself. It sounds amazing.
yeah, it does.
Thank you. No,
Yeah,
11 is probably the perfect age group. Middle
perfect.
grade was interesting. I know I have to go, but middle grade's interesting because you have to write for young, like older young kids who can read themselves, but
Hmm.
also keeping in mind that these books will be read to like maybe 8-year-olds, right? Kind of
Yeah,
like, a lot of like more famous middle grade, like Harry Potter and stuff. That was generally what was done.
yeah.
So you got to make it kind of accessible on different levels.
It's beautiful.
But yeah, that's what's next for me.
All
Well,
right.
Jordan, where can our listeners find you and your work or find you online?
Well, I am primarily on Instagram for author related things. TikTok has kind of expanded into me talking about lots of things I care about, like
I follow you there.
feminism and
You're great.
deconversion. Oh, thank you. I'm trying to rein it in a little bit since I'm about to like introduce myself as a children's author. And if like their parents Google me and I'm just like down with the patriarchy, like I think I need to be a little careful. But I'm just the state of our society is so messed up that I couldn't help but use my platform to say something.
Yeah.
And that something ended up being a lot of things. Um, but yeah, you can find me for book things on Instagram. And I also have a mailing list. I have yet to send out a newsletter, but I'm collecting that because I want to be less dependent on things like Meta and TikTok to reach my
Mm-hmm.
reader base. So I'd love if people signed up there. I also do school visits. I do visits in general. A weirdly like a design firm invited me out to talk about storytelling. It's like a graphic design firm because they just thought it would be fun. So I will come to where you are and talk about stories if you pay
Beautiful.
me. And yeah, that's what
Well,
you can find out about that on my website.
thank you so much for
Awesome.
coming on. We really appreciate
Yes.
you. You're welcome back anytime. So,
And
uh,
thank you for writing your books. We love
yeah,
them.
they're
Thank
amazing.
you. No, you guys seem great. You got your vibes kind of remind me a little bit of the normal gossip podcast. So I'll definitely like
Hmm.
check out yours because I love
Oh,
that
perfect.
podcast.
All right. We hope you do. And listeners, thank you so much for listening and tune in tomorrow or next week for our regularly scheduled content. Bye.
Bye.